Jefferson Heights apartments sat on the east side of the city, tucked behind an abandoned shopping center and a row of liquor stores that had bars on the windows. Most people only came through Jefferson Heights for two reasons. They either lived there, or they were looking for trouble. The complex had been built decades ago and looked every bit of its age. Cracked sidewalks, peeling paint, broken stair rails, streetlights that worked when they felt like it. During the day, kids rode bicycles through the parking lot while old men sat outside, watching everything that happened. And in Jefferson Heights, everybody watched everything. Nobody trusted anybody. But everybody knew everybody's business. If somebody got arrested, the whole complex knew before lunch. If somebody got evicted, people were talking about it before the moving truck left. And if somebody was running a scam, eventually somebody noticed. Apartment 3B sat on the second floor near the back parking lot. That's where Tasha lived, at least according to the lease. According to every government form she filled out, Tasha was a struggling single mother trying to raise 2 children on her own. No boyfriend, no additional income, no adult help inside the household. That was the story on paper. Reality looked different. Every night around 8 o'clock, a black Dodge Charger rolled into the parking lot. Every morning around 6, it rolled back out. The driver was Marcus, and everybody knew Marcus lived there. Everybody except the people signing the paperwork. For almost 4 years, Tasha and Marcus thought they had it figured out. They thought they were smarter than the system, smarter than the housing office, smarter than the investigators, smarter than the people around them. And for a while, maybe they were. Because nothing happened. Month after month, year after year, the money kept coming. The benefits kept coming. And nobody knocked on the door. That made them comfortable. Comfortable people make mistakes. And mistakes have consequences. The first mistake was believing they could keep lying forever. The second mistake was greed. At first, Marcus only stayed a few nights a week. Then it became every night. At first, he helped buy groceries. Then, he helped pay bills. Then, he practically lived there full-time. But Tasha never updated anything, never reported anything, never changed a single form. Why would she? Everything was working. The rent stayed low. The benefits stayed active. Life got easier. Then Marcus started bringing home more money. A lot more money, money that didn't make sense. A new television showed up. Then expensive phones, then designer clothes, then stacks of cash. Tasha asked where it came from exactly one time. Marcus smiled and told her not to worry about it. After that, she stopped asking. Because she liked what the money could buy. That was the beginning of the end. The truth was, Marcus had gotten involved with people making money through financial fraud. Fast money. Easy money. The kind of money that feels great right up until the handcuffs show up. Every month he went deeper. Every month he got bolder. And every month he became more convinced he would never get caught. What Marcus didn't know was somebody had already started paying attention. A woman named Denise lived downstairs. Denise noticed everything. She noticed Marcus leaving for work. She noticed Marcus carrying groceries. She noticed Marcus taking trash to the dumpster. She noticed Marcus walking the kids to school. She noticed Marcus living there. And eventually, she picked up the phone. 1 complaint became 2. 2 became 3. Then, an investigator got assigned the file, and once that happened, the clock started ticking. At first, nobody noticed. Not Tasha, not Marcus, not even the kids. Life kept moving the same way it always had. The kids went to school. Tasha filled out paperwork. Marcus came and went in that black Charger. The bills got paid. Food stayed in the refrigerator. The television stayed on. Everything looked normal. That was the dangerous part. Most people think trouble shows up with sirens and flashing lights. Real trouble usually starts in silence. While Marcus was living his life, an investigator named Reynolds was building a file. Reynolds wasn't interested in rumors. Rumors didn't hold up in court. Evidence did. So he started collecting evidence: vehicle registrations, photographs, witness statements, delivery records, anything that helped tell the truth. And the truth was becoming harder for Tasha and Marcus to hide. The first photographs didn't seem important. Marcus carrying groceries into apartment 3B, Marcus taking trash to the dumpster, Marcus helping one of the kids carry a bicycle upstairs. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal, just a man doing things people do where they live. Then came more photographs. Marcus unloading furniture, Marcus carrying laundry baskets, Marcus walking out of the apartment before sunrise, Marcus returning after work, week after week, month after month. The pattern never changed. According to the paperwork, Marcus didn't live there. According to reality, he lived there more consistently than some people on the lease. Meanwhile, Marcus had other problems he wasn't telling Tasha about. The money wasn't coming in as easy as it used to. The people he worked with were getting nervous. One guy disappeared, another got arrested. A third stopped answering his phone. Nobody said it out loud, but everybody knew something was happening. The circle was getting smaller. And whenever a criminal circle gets smaller, somebody usually starts talking. Marcus hated talking about business at home. Anytime Tasha asked questions, he brushed her off. Don't worry about it. That was always his answer. Don't worry about it. At first she accepted it. Then she started noticing things. Marcus checking out the window late at night. Marcus deleting messages. Marcus stepping outside to answer phone calls. Marcus becoming short-tempered. Something had changed, even if she couldn't explain it. One evening they sat in the living room watching television. The kids were asleep. Marcus stared at his phone. Tasha stared at Marcus. Finally, she asked the question, "You sure everything good?" Marcus didn't even look up. "Yeah. You don't seem good." "I'm fine." "You sure?" Marcus slammed the phone onto the couch. "I said I'm fine." The room went silent. Tasha didn't ask another question, but she knew. People don't act like that when everything is fine. Across town, investigator Reynolds received another piece of information. A second complaint. Different person. Same story. Marcus lived there. Marcus paid bills there. Marcus was part of the household. Now Reynolds had something he liked. Corroboration. Different people telling the same story. That made him pay even closer attention. A few weeks later, he parked near Jefferson Heights before sunrise. He sat in an unmarked vehicle drinking bad coffee and watching. At 5:57 in the morning, the apartment door opened. Marcus walked out. Just like the complaints said. Just like the photographs suggested. Just like the witnesses described. Reynolds wrote down the time. Then, he watched Marcus drive away. The next evening, he came back. Same apartment, same car, same routine. By now, the picture was becoming crystal clear. The only thing left was documenting enough evidence to prove it. Back at Jefferson Heights, life continued. The summer heat rolled in. Kids played basketball until dark. Neighbors sat outside gossiping, and Marcus kept pretending everything was under control. But Jefferson Heights had a way of exposing people. Everybody talked, everybody watched, and eventually somebody always slipped. Marcus slipped at a cookout. Not because he was drunk, not because he was high, because he got arrogant. A man joked about Marcus always having money. Everybody laughed. Marcus laughed too. Then he said something stupid, the kind of thing people say when they've been getting away with something too long. "Man, I ain't worked a real job in forever." The table erupted in laughter. Everybody thought he was joking. Everybody except one person. One person remembered exactly what he said. And later that story traveled, like everything else in Jefferson Heights, from porch to porch, apartment to apartment, until eventually it reached ears Marcus never intended it to reach. Months had passed since the first complaint. The file on Reynolds' desk was now thick. Every page told the same story. Every photograph told the same story. Marcus lived there. The benefits paperwork said otherwise. And that was only one piece of the puzzle, because another investigation was moving at the same time. One connected to financial fraud, one connected to stolen identities, one connected to money. A lot of money. And one afternoon, those two investigations finally crossed paths. When they did, everything changed. Reynolds leaned back in his chair and stared at the information in front of him. For the first time, he wasn't looking at a simple benefits case anymore. He was looking at something much bigger. And if the information was accurate, Marcus Williams was standing right in the middle of it. The file from the fraud investigation landed on Reynolds' desk just before lunch. At first glance, it looked like any other case file. Names, addresses, phone numbers, financial records, witness statements, the usual. Then he saw Marcus's name. Once, twice, 3 times. Reynolds sat back in his chair. Now he understood why the case had suddenly drawn attention from other agencies. This wasn't just about benefits anymore. This was about fraud. Real fraud. The kind that ruined people's lives. The reports described stolen identities, credit cards opened in other people's names, bank accounts that didn't belong to the people using them. Thousands of dollars moving from account to account before victims even realized they had been targeted. And right in the middle of it sat a familiar name, Marcus Williams. Across town, Marcus had no idea what was happening. He was sitting in apartment 3B eating takeout and watching television. The kids were arguing over a video game. Tasha was folding laundry. Everything felt normal. That was the thing about disasters. Most people don't see them coming. One day you're living your life. The next day, everything changes. A week later, another arrest was made. One of Marcus's associates got picked up during a traffic stop. The man had outstanding warrants. Investigators searched his vehicle. Then, they searched his apartment. What they found was enough to make him start talking. And once he started talking, he didn't stop. Names came out. Addresses came out. Phone numbers came out. Marcus's name came out. Investigators listened carefully. Every statement got documented. Every detail got verified. The walls were closing in. Marcus could feel it. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but he knew something wasn't right. The phone calls became less frequent. Certain people disappeared. Others suddenly changed numbers. One guy packed up and left town altogether. That made Marcus nervous. People don't run when everything is fine. One night, he stood on the apartment balcony, smoking a cigarette and staring into the parking lot. For the first time in years, he felt fear. Real fear. The kind that sits in your stomach. The kind that keeps you awake at night. Inside the apartment, Tasha noticed it too. Marcus barely slept. He snapped at people. He jumped whenever somebody knocked on the door. She asked him what was wrong. He gave the same answer he always gave. Nothing. But she didn't believe him anymore. The truth was finally catching up, and the truth had a long memory. 2 weeks later, investigators obtained another warrant, then another. Bank records, phone records, financial transactions, everything started connecting. The benefits case, the fraud case, the identity theft investigation, separate pieces of the same puzzle, and every piece pointed back to the same apartment in Jefferson Heights. Apartment 3B, the file grew thicker. The evidence grew stronger. The investigators grew more confident. Now they weren't asking whether crimes had occurred. They were asking how they wanted to execute the arrests. The decision came quickly. Early morning, maximum surprise. Minimal chance of evidence disappearing. A team was assembled. Vehicles were assigned. Paperwork was signed, and a date was selected. Nobody inside apartment 3B knew it yet. But the last normal night of their lives was only days away. The date had been selected. The paperwork had been signed. The warrants had been approved. Now all investigators had to do was wait. For the next few days, Reynolds kept his routine. He checked reports, reviewed statements, answered questions. But the hard part of the investigation was over. The evidence was there. The witnesses were there. The records were there. Everything pointed back to the same place, apartment 3B. Meanwhile, Marcus was doing everything he could to convince himself he wasn't in trouble. He stayed busy. He stayed distracted. He stayed in denial. But every time his phone rang, his stomach tightened. Every time a police car drove past, he looked twice. Every time somebody knocked on the apartment door, he froze. Fear had finally arrived. And once fear arrives, it rarely leaves. Tasha felt it too. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it. The apartment didn't feel the same anymore. The laughter wasn't the same. The conversations weren't the same. Even the kids seemed to notice the tension. The entire household felt different, like everybody was waiting for something. The problem was, nobody knew exactly what. Then Tuesday arrived. The day began like every other day. The sun came up, people went to work, kids went to school, cars filled the parking lot. Nobody had any idea what was coming. That evening, Marcus barely ate dinner. He sat at the kitchen table staring at his phone. Tasha watched him. The kids watched television. Nobody talked much. Around 10 o'clock, the apartment went quiet. By midnight, everybody was asleep, except Marcus. Marcus sat in the living room staring through the blinds, watching the parking lot, watching every car that passed, watching shadows move beneath the streetlights. At some point after 2 in the morning, he finally fell asleep on the couch. 4 hours later, investigators were gathering across town. Coffee cups, clipboards, body armor, warrants. Everybody knew their assignment. Nobody was smiling, nobody was joking. The atmosphere was professional, calm, focused. Reynolds stood near the front of the room. He reviewed the plan one final time. Then, everyone headed toward their vehicles. The convoy rolled out before sunrise, quietly, without sirens, without lights. Just a line of vehicles moving through sleeping streets. Back at Jefferson Heights, the complex sat in darkness. Most residents were asleep. The basketball court was empty. The parking lot was still. Apartment 3B looked exactly like every other apartment. Nothing about it suggested the storm that was about to hit. At 5:41 a.m., the first vehicle entered the complex. At 5:42, the second vehicle arrived. At 5:43, everything changed. Doors opened, officers stepped out, investigators moved into position. The building was surrounded in seconds. Reynolds climbed the stairs. A deputy stood beside him. Another officer moved to the rear exit. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. They had rehearsed this. Reynolds looked at the apartment door. Apartment 3B. Years of lies sat behind that door. Years of fraud. Years of bad decisions. Years of shortcuts. Now it was time to see where those choices had led. The deputy stepped forward. Then the pounding started. Boom, boom, boom. The sound echoed through the hallway. Inside the apartment, Tasha's eyes flew open. For one brief second, she had no idea what was happening. Then the pounding came again. Boom, boom, boom. Police department! Marcus bolted upright from the couch. His heart immediately started racing. The sound hit him like a punch, because deep down, he already knew. Nobody comes pounding on your door before sunrise to bring good news. Tasha stepped into the living room. The kids were awake now, confused, scared. The pounding continued, louder this time. Open the door! Marcus moved toward the window. His hands were shaking. He pulled the blinds back. The moment he looked outside, every bit of color drained from his face. Patrol cars, unmarked vehicles, deputies, investigators. The parking lot was full. The entire complex was waking up. Lights were turning on. Curtains were moving. Neighbors were looking outside. Jefferson Heights had just received the biggest show it had seen in years, and everybody wanted a front row seat. Marcus slowly let the blinds fall back into place. He turned toward Tasha. Neither one spoke. Neither one needed to. The look on his face said everything. The lies were over. The waiting was over. The excuses were over. The bill had finally come due. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The apartment felt frozen in time. The kids stood in the hallway. Tasha stood near the kitchen. Marcus stood by the window. The pounding came again. Boom, boom, boom. Open the door now. Marcus looked around the apartment. For one desperate moment, his eyes landed on the bedroom, then the closet, then the kitchen table. His mind was racing. What did they know? How much did they know? How long had they been watching? The deputy pounded again, this time harder. Marcus knew it was over. There wasn't a back door he could use. There wasn't a story he could tell. There wasn't a lie left to hide behind. Slowly, he walked toward the front door. His hand shook as he unlocked it. The moment the door opened, officers stepped forward. Marcus Williams? Marcus didn't answer. He didn't have to. The deputy already knew exactly who he was. Step outside. The hallway filled with movement. Officers entered. Investigators followed. The kids started crying. Tasha tried to calm them down. Nothing worked. Fear had taken over the apartment. Reynolds entered carrying a folder. The same folder that had grown thicker every week for months. Photographs, statements, records, evidence, years of evidence. He looked around the apartment. Television, furniture, electronics. Everything carefully documented. Marcus was escorted into the hallway. A deputy placed him against the wall. Handcuffs clicked shut. The sound echoed through the building. Outside, neighbors watched from balconies. Others watched through cracked blinds. Some stood in the parking lot, pretending not to stare. Everybody knew what those handcuffs meant. Marcus lowered his head. The confidence was gone. The swagger was gone. The excuses were gone. Now he looked like every other person who thought they would never get caught. Inside the apartment, investigators began searching. Closets, drawers, cabinets, boxes, every room, every corner, every hiding place. Tasha sat at the kitchen table, trying not to cry. The children sat beside her. One investigator remained nearby. Another documented everything being found. A notebook, several phones, financial records, mail that didn't belong to the people living there, cards with different names, documents investigators immediately set aside. The atmosphere changed. The deeper the search went, the more serious everyone became. Reynolds didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He simply watched. Because this wasn't about winning. It was about proving the truth. And the truth was unfolding right in front of them. Outside, Marcus watched box after box being carried from the apartment. Each item felt like another nail in the coffin. He finally understood what had happened. The investigation hadn't started last week. It hadn't started last month. It had started a long time ago. And while he was living his life, investigators had been quietly building a case. One piece at a time. One mistake at a time. One lie at a time. Nearly 2 hours passed before the search finally ended. The apartment looked different now. Not physically, emotionally. The place felt empty, exposed, defeated. Reynolds approached Tasha. His voice remained calm, professional, direct. He explained what would happen next: interviews, reviews, hearings, further investigation. Nothing happened all at once, but enough had happened for Tasha to understand the direction things were heading. Her benefits were under review. Her housing situation was under review. Everything was under review. The foundation she had been standing on for years was beginning to crack. Outside, a tow truck arrived. Marcus watched as his Charger was loaded up. For years, that car had been a symbol: success, status, money. Now, it was evidence. Another reminder that nothing lasts forever. The deputies escorted him toward a patrol vehicle. The entire complex watched. Nobody laughed. Nobody cheered. The scene felt heavier than that, because deep down, everybody understood something. Bad decisions rarely hurt, only the people making them. The children watched from the apartment window, and for the first time all morning, Marcus couldn't look in their direction. A patrol car door opened, then closed. And as the vehicle pulled away from Jefferson Heights, Tasha stood alone in apartment 3B for the first time in years. Not because she wanted to be, because everything they had built on lies was finally starting to collapse. Silence inside apartment 3B felt strange. Just a few hours earlier, the place had been full of noise. Now, it felt empty. Tasha sat at the kitchen table, staring at the same spot for nearly 20 minutes. The kids stayed close to her. Nobody wanted to leave the room. Nobody wanted to ask questions, because everybody already knew something bad had happened. The only difference was that the children didn't understand how bad. Outside, Jefferson Heights was buzzing. People talked in parking lots. People stood on balconies. Phones lit up with messages. By lunchtime, half the neighborhood had heard some version of the story. By dinner, the story had changed a dozen times. Some people said Marcus was going away for years. Others claimed federal agents were involved. Some swore investigators had carried boxes of evidence out of the apartment. Nobody knew the entire truth, but everybody knew one thing. Apartment 3B had become the talk of Jefferson Heights. The next few weeks were brutal. Letters started arriving. Official letters, certified letters, legal notices, requests for records, requests for interviews, requests for information. Every envelope felt heavier than the one before. Tasha opened each one with shaking hands. The reality she had avoided for years was now sitting directly in front of her. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Investigators wanted answers. Housing officials wanted answers. Benefit administrators wanted answers. Everybody wanted answers. And most of those answers led right back to Marcus. Then came the interview. Tasha sat across from Reynolds in a plain office. No flashing lights. No dramatic speeches. Just questions. Question after question. Some were easy. Others weren't. How long had Marcus stayed there? How often? Did he contribute money? Did he purchase household items? Did he help pay bills? The truth was uncomfortable, because every honest answer contradicted years of paperwork. The deeper the interview went, the harder it became to pretend. Eventually, Tasha stopped fighting it. The story had fallen apart. There was no point holding it together anymore. Back at Jefferson Heights, the pressure kept building. Neighbors noticed things changing. The charger never came back. Marcus never came back. The laughter disappeared. The apartment lights seemed dimmer. Even the kids seemed quieter. Life inside apartment 3B had become a waiting game. Waiting for decisions. Waiting for hearings. Waiting for consequences. Then, one afternoon, another letter arrived. This one hit harder than all the others. Housing assistance was being terminated pending final review. Tasha read the letter 3 times, then a 4th, then a 5th. The words never changed. The help she depended on was disappearing. The numbers no longer worked. Without that assistance, the rent became impossible. For the first time, real panic set in. Not fear, not anxiety, panic. The kind that keeps people awake all night. The kind that follows them everywhere. A month later, another notice arrived. Then another. Deadlines, requirements, warnings. The situation was getting worse, not better. Meanwhile, Marcus was fighting his own battle. Court dates, attorneys, interviews, evidence. Every week seemed to bring another problem. The case investigators had built was stronger than he expected. Much stronger. The confidence he once carried was gone. Now he spent most of his time worrying about what came next. And what came next wasn't good. Back at apartment 3B, the final notice eventually arrived. Tasha saw the envelope and immediately knew. Some letters announced themselves before they're even opened. Her hands trembled, her chest tightened. Slowly, she unfolded the paper. The words hit like a punch. The apartment had to be vacated. For several minutes, she just sat there, staring, not moving, not speaking. The kids were in the other room. They had no idea their lives were about to change again. Tasha looked around the apartment, the walls, the furniture, the kitchen, The living room. Years of memories lived there. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, school pictures, family dinners, arguments, laughter, everything. And now, she was losing it. The moving truck arrived 2 weeks later. Jefferson Heights watched once again. People always watch. Furniture came downstairs piece by piece. Boxes followed, bags followed. The apartment slowly emptied. Every trip down those stairs felt like another reminder of how everything had unraveled. By sunset, apartment 3B was almost empty. The same apartment that once felt secure now echoed with emptiness. Tasha stood in the doorway one last time. The children stood beside her. Nobody said much. There wasn't much left to say. The choices had already been made. The consequences had already arrived. And the story wasn't finished yet. Because the hardest part wasn't losing the apartment. The hardest part was living with the realization that none of it had happened overnight. The collapse had started years earlier, with one lie, then another, and eventually those lies became a life. Now that life was gone, and all that remained was the wreckage. For the first few weeks, Tasha felt like she was moving through a fog. Every day looked the same. Wake up, deal with paperwork, answer questions, make phone calls, try to figure out what came next. The children asked questions she didn't know how to answer. Questions about Marcus. Questions about the apartment. Questions about why everything had changed. Questions about when life would go back to normal. Tasha never had a good answer, because deep down, she knew the truth. Life wasn't going back to normal. Normal was gone. The apartment was gone. The money was gone. The security she thought she had was gone. And Marcus was fighting battles of his own. The court proceedings moved slowly. Weeks became months. Every hearing brought new information, new evidence, new testimony, new problems. The investigators laid everything out piece by piece. Financial records, witness statements, phone records, documents, photographs. The story Marcus had told himself for years slowly fell apart. Not because somebody accused him, because the evidence spoke for itself. The same thing happened to Tasha. Every document she had signed came back into focus. Every statement, every form, every omission. Things that once felt small suddenly looked much larger. Sitting in a courtroom, she finally understood something. The system didn't collapse on her overnight. The consequences didn't appear overnight. They had been building for years. The hearing room was quiet when one official made a statement that stuck with her. Most people don't get into trouble because of one decision. They get into trouble because of 1,000 small decisions. Tasha couldn't stop thinking about that. 1,000 small decisions. Because that was exactly what happened. No single lie destroyed her life. It was years of lies stacked on top of each other. No single shortcut destroyed her future. It was years of shortcuts becoming a habit. One choice at a time. One excuse at a time. One justification at a time. Eventually, the pile became too heavy to carry, and when it finally collapsed, it buried everything underneath it. Months later, Jefferson Heights had already moved on. The neighborhood always moved on. New tenants arrived, new stories spread. New gossip replaced old gossip. Apartment 3B belonged to somebody else now. The parking lot looked the same. The buildings looked the same. Life kept moving. But for Tasha, every time she drove past the complex, she remembered the lies, she remembered the warnings, she remembered the letters, she remembered the pounding on the door, and she remembered the moment everything finally caught up to them. Because that's the thing about consequences. They don't care how long it takes, they don't care how comfortable you've become, and they don't care how many times you've convinced yourself you'll never get caught. Sooner or later, the bill comes due, and when it does, nobody else can pay it for you. Sooner or later, the bill comes due, and when it does, nobody else can pay it for you. A year later, people in Jefferson Heights still talked about Apartment 3B. Not every day, not every week, but every now and then somebody would bring it up. Usually when a new tenant moved in. Usually when somebody started bragging about getting over on the system. Usually when somebody said they were too smart to get caught. Then somebody would mention Tasha and Marcus, and the conversation would get quiet because everybody remembered how it ended. What most people didn't know was how hard life became after the cameras stopped rolling, after the gossip faded, after the neighborhood moved on. That's where the real punishment began. There were no flashing lights anymore, no deputies, no investigators knocking on doors, just consequences, daily consequences. The kind you wake up with every morning, the kind you carry around all day, the kind that follow you everywhere. Tasha learned that quickly. Every application became harder. Every form required explanations. Every interview brought questions. The mistakes of the past had become part of her future. Meanwhile, Marcus was learning lessons of his own. For years, he had believed he controlled everything: the money, the scams, the people around him. Then, one day he discovered something. The moment handcuffs close, control disappears. Suddenly, other people make decisions: judges, attorneys, investigators, probation officers. The freedom he once took for granted no longer belonged to him. The lifestyle he spent years building disappeared faster than he ever imagined. The expensive clothes were gone, the cash was gone, the charger was gone. Most of the people who called themselves friends were gone too. That might have been the biggest surprise of all. When the money stopped, so did the friendships. The phone stopped ringing. The invitations stopped coming. The people who benefited from Marcus's success disappeared when he needed them most. That reality hurt more than he expected. Back in Jefferson Heights, new families occupied old apartments. Children played basketball in the same parking lot. Neighbors sat in the same folding chairs. Life continued. Because neighborhoods don't stop moving. People come, people go, stories change, but lessons remain. One evening, nearly 2 years after the raid, an older resident sat outside talking to a younger man. The younger man was bragging, talking about easy money, talking about beating the system, talking about how nobody could prove anything. The older man listened quietly. Then he pointed toward Building 3. "You see that apartment over there?" The younger man nodded. "Used to be a couple lived there." The younger man shrugged. "So?" The older man leaned back in his chair. "They said the same thing." The younger man didn't have much to say after that. Because deep down, everybody knows the truth. Most people don't get caught because they make one mistake. They get caught because they make the same mistake over and over until they start believing they're untouchable. That's what happened to Marcus. That's what happened to Tasha. At some point, they stopped being careful. At some point, they stopped being worried. At some point, they convinced themselves the rules applied to everybody except them. That was the moment they lost. Not the day of the raid, not the day of the eviction, not the day of the hearings. The moment they truly lost was the moment they believed there would never be consequences. Years later, if you drove through Jefferson Heights, you would never know any of it happened. The parking lot looked the same. The buildings looked the same. The stair rails were still rusted. The sidewalks were still cracked. Kids still rode bicycles through the complex. Old men still sat outside watching everything. And everybody still knew everybody's business. Some things never change. But somewhere in the city, two people were living with decisions they couldn't take back. Living with memories they couldn't erase. Living with consequences they spent years creating. All because they thought one more lie wouldn't matter. Then another. Then another. Until those lies became a life. And eventually that life collapsed under its own weight. That's how it ended. Not with one bad day, not with one mistake, but with years of choices finally catching up. And in Jefferson Heights, people still remembered. Because stories come and go. But warnings have a way of sticking around, especially the expensive ones.